Let's talk some chess. I'm making this video soon after the release of the movie Oppenheimer, and if you watch the movie, no spoilers, but you'll see that J. Robert Oppenheimer befriends Albert Einstein, which sort of makes sense. They were both doing advanced physics around the same time, but in addition to doing a lot of work together, they also played a lot of chess, which is pretty neat because we have these two very prominent historical figures, both geniuses in their own right, but we get to sort of see how they measure up on a chessboard. So Einstein with the white pieces opens this up with e4. I made a first version of this video, but I flipped. I said Einstein was playing with black pieces and Oppenheimer with the white pieces, so I'm making the other one to make sure we get the record right and set the record straight. Oppenheimer plays e5. We have knight to f3 by Einstein, knight to c6 by Oppenheimer, and now bishop to b5, the Ruy Lopez. So clearly both of these gentlemen know a bit about chess, at least, no crazy moves so far, very standard opening to play even today. And Oppenheimer responds with an equally common line, plays a6, which is the Morphy defense. Morphy was around sometime before these gentlemen, but it's unclear if they knew who he was, or I don't even know if this at the time was named the Morphy defense, but it's on the board, and it's attacking the bishop on b5, forcing the bishop to either capture or make a retreat. Einstein here retreats it to a4, and now the most natural continuation, b5, attacking the light squared bishop and forcing it to b3. This allows Oppenheimer to get the knight to f6, attacking this undefended e4 pawn, and Einstein actually ignores the pawn for the moment, or I guess not even for the moment, just ignores the pawn and castles kingside and sort of baits Oppenheimer into taking on e4, which Oppenheimer does. And it looks like you picked up a free pawn, but this is going to allow Einstein a nice series of moves to sort of get a nice position in this sort of setting. And the other thing I want to note is that this knight on e4 doesn't achieve much. We'll talk about what that means in a couple of moves when we look at some different lines. So here we immediately have e1, rook to e1 by Einstein attacking this knight on e4. The knight is undefended, so to defend it, Oppenheimer plays d5, now protecting this pawn on e4. And now a4 by Einstein, trying to break up this pawn, sort of mini pawn structure on the queen side. This was actually, unfortunately for Oppenheimer, the position where he could just take over the game. The correct move here is to play bishop to c5, and this is sort of what I meant by having the knight on e4 be really consequential. If there's a bishop on c5 as well, then you're guarding this, you're attacking this f2 pawn twice with the knight and the bishop, and this pawn is only defended by the king. The rook has now abandoned the defense of the pawn, so this can be trouble. It's sort of similar to the fried liver attack, where you have a knight and a bishop attacking this pawn, and here Einstein would have to sell out to essentially play defense here. So the correct move would be d4, obviously blocking the path of the bishop, opening up an alley for the dark squared bishop to get involved in the defense, but here just knight takes on d4, and now you have these really powerful pieces in the center of the board. Knight takes knight, bishop takes knight, and now again you still have this double threat on f2, so bishop blocks, but now Oppenheimer can just trade down. Bishop takes, rook takes, and now bishop to e6, and now you can see Oppenheimer is up 2 pawns. He has a very active knight on e4, and this is just a way better position for Oppenheimer. So unfortunately, he didn't see this. After this a4 move, he wasn't able to find this bishop to c5 move. Instead, he just saw the threat of a takes on b5, and he dealt with that threat by playing b4 to get that pawn out of harm's way. And now Einstein plays b3, which simultaneously attacks the knight, kicks it away from e4, and also deals with the threat of bishop to c5, because of course if bishop to c5 now, then pawn takes knight, and there's no more double attack on the f2 pawn. So Oppenheimer had a small window, and unfortunately it is now closed. And here he makes the sort of the second mistake of the game. You need to retreat your knight here to f6, and the idea here is you want to clog up the f-file. As we're going to see, that's going to become a very important path for Einstein's attack. So it would be very nice to have a knight on f6, again, as we'll see in a couple of moves. But instead here, Oppenheimer puts the knight on c5. He wants to get rid of this bishop on b3, which is a noble idea, but unfortunately it allows knight takes on e5. Well, it was going to happen anyways, but now we get knight takes on e5, and if you remember, a couple moves ago, we thought that Oppenheimer taking this pawn on e4, we thought it was a free pawn, but now Einstein wins the pawn back with knight takes on e5. And here, you really have to be very, very careful. You have to play very precisely. If the knight moves away, imagine some silly move here. With the black pieces, you can get knight takes knight on c6, and this opens up a discover check from the rook to the king. The knight is involved. The knight is attacking the queen, so now if you move the king or block the rook, the knight will take the queen, and this is just completely game over. So you have to be very careful here, worried about this discovered attack from the rook. And here Oppenheimer tries to defend by playing, knight to e7, and now there's going to be no more discoveries if the white knight moves away, because the rook will be blocked by the knight on e7. Unfortunately for this knight, it's about to become the most pinned piece of all time, as we will see in just a couple of moves. So here we have queen to f3 by Einstein developing the queen on the f file, and now you can see why it would be very nice to have a knight on f6 if you're playing with the black pieces, because right now Einstein is threatening checkmate if the queen can take on f7. Again, imagine some silly move here, then queen takes on f7 is checkmate because the knight is guarding the queen and the knight is protecting the d7 square. The king just has nowhere to go. So you have to worry about this threat, and Oppenheimer plays f6. In the words of Grandmaster Ben Feingold, never play f6, because now the king side has opened up, and this diagonal to the king is open, and Einstein starts off the attack by playing queen to h5. And this is a pattern you'll see very frequently if you do like puzzles, daily chess puzzles, or some sort of puzzle rush. You'll see this combination with the queen and the king side pawns and the knight very frequently, so it's good to sort of understand the mechanics behind it. Here, you can't run away with the king because the knight is taking away the d7 square, and you don't really want to block with the knight on g6 because then knight takes knight, and this is just a disaster. You have a discovered check from the rook, so the king has to move, and then the knight is taking the rook on h8 in the next move, so that doesn't work. So the only move here that works, it's not a good move, but it's the best move, is g6, but now you get knight takes on g6, and again, this is sort of the idea. After the pawn takes back, the queen picks up the rook on h8 because the h-file has been cleared away by the pawn taking the knight. So you've just won a rook and a pawn for a knight, which is excellent in almost all positions, or most positions I should say. And if you'll notice now, this knight is pinned to the king by the rook, and the bishop is pinned by the queen, so there's just a ton of pressure on Oppenheimer's pieces, and Einstein's pieces are super active, controlling a ton of squares, and this is, in addition to a material advantage, just a much more pleasant position to play. So here Oppenheimer, probably wishes he had the knight on f6, but he has the knight on c5 instead, and he makes use of it by taking the bishop on b3. Einstein takes back, and now queen to d6 by Oppenheimer, trying to get some counterplay. But the problem here is you have these two pieces that are pinned, and you really need them to be able to move again. The correct move here is to bring the king to f7, unpinning these pieces and making them sort of unscrewed from their squares, and helping to defend. This queen to d6 move doesn't work because now you get bishop to h6 by Einstein. You always want to attack pinned pieces. Right now the bishop can't move because the queen is pinning it, so you want to pile on attackers because this piece cannot move away to defend itself. And indeed, in this position, Oppenheimer cannot defend this piece. It looks like you might be able to move the knight to f5, which opens up a discovered defense from the queen to the bishop, but remember, this knight is pinned from this rook, so there's just no way to defend this bishop, and Oppenheimer sees that it's fallen and just moves the king away to d7, now unpinning the knight and unpinning the bishop, but of course it's too late. We have bishop takes bishop on f8, and now Oppenheimer has just a huge material advantage, but they play on in the interest of exploring chess, and obviously, they play on. So bishop to b7 by Oppenheimer, fianchettoing the light squared bishop. Also now sort of a counter pin. The rook is now pinning the dark squared bishop to the queen, so this dark squared bishop can't really move without losing the queen, but Einstein remedies this with queen to g7, unpinning, and now the poor knight is pinned again. And I should note, the knight is pinned twice. It's pinned by the queen to the king, and it's pinned by the bishop to the queen. So just a knight that looks like it would be a good defensive piece. It's in the middle of everything, but it can't move, and it's going to be very hard to get this knight to be able to move again. So we'll just keep an eye on how that develops. Rook to e8, protecting the knight, because again, now you have three pieces that are attacking this knight. So Oppenheimer defends it with 3 pieces, which is great. But now Einstein looks at this position and he says, okay, I have a bunch of active pieces and there's no real threat of counterplay from Oppenheimer, so why don't I get some more pieces into the game, and plays knight to d2, which is an awesome move. It totally ignores all the very active pieces and all the action that's going on the 6th, 7th, and 8th ranks of the board, and just says, well, I've got more pieces and I want to bring them into the game as well. Why do, the bishop and the queen and the rook get to have all the fun? What about this knight joining in the attack? And here, it's really tough for Oppenheimer to find a move. This is sort of a zugzwang. It's not quite a position where moving is actually a disadvantage and you don't want to move, but you have to. It's not quite one of those, but essentially, you can't move the knight legally. You can't move the rook or the queen or the king because they're protecting the knight, and this bishop can't move productively because it's blocked by a pawn here on d5, and it really has nowhere to go. So Oppenheimer just pushes pawns here and plays c5, but now Einstein gets his other rook into the game with rook a to d1, and Oppenheimer, again, no pieces to move, so just has to push pawns, plays a5, and now Einstein really ends the game. See if you can find his move here to just really put the finishing touches on a very stylish game while I give you a couple of seconds. Okay, this is a pretty straightforward but very useful tactic. It's really nice in this position especially. It's knight to c4, and again, we saw this knight come to d2, now it comes to c4. The main threat, obviously, is knight takes queen on d6, but it looks like that threat can be warded off quite easily because of pawn takes knight, which is indeed what Oppenheimer plays. But now you get pawn takes pawn on c4, and the action is not on c4, it's on d1, where the rook is now pinning the queen to the king, and now you just have the queen pinning the knight, the bishop pinning the knight, the rook pinning the queen, and everything is falling apart. For Oppenheimer, we have queen takes rook, rook takes queen with check, and now this is just an insanely big material advantage, and Oppenheimer's king is on the run. The king moves to c8, and unfortunately, in moving to c8, abandons the defense of the knight on e7. Einstein takes the knight on e7, and in this position, Oppenheimer finally resigned the game. He's down a queen, and his king is on the run, and honestly, in this position, maybe he knew it, maybe he didn't, there's a checkmate in 8 moves. So the game is completely over, and he resigned the game then and there. Let's go a little further just to show the checkmate, because it is kind of a nice combination. Here, the best defense with the black pieces is actually playing bishop to c6, getting ready to maneuver the bishop to d7 to block the path of the queen on c7. And here, with the white pieces, you play bishop to d6, now eyeing the c7 square. Obviously, queen to c7 would be checkmate, but now the bishop blocks on d7. And now a really nice move here with the white pieces playing bishop to f4. You could even play, I think it still works to play bishop to e5. I didn't look at that line, but just a wonderful sidestep by the bishop to f4, now letting the rook and the queen do the work on the 7th rank, attacking this bishop twice, and there's no way to defend this bishop. Here you can try with the rook on d8, but now queen to e7, getting in even closer, threatening all sorts of things. Pawn to f5, it's really the only, there's no moves in this position, so you just have to move a pawn, but now queen takes on c5, as we were alluding to. This obviously comes with check, and the position is falling apart. Queen to c7, checkmate is a threat, so you move the king to b7, but now queen to c7 anyways with check, king to a6, and now rook to d6, and after the bishop blocks, rook takes on c6 is checkmate. So there was a checkmate in 8 moves. Maybe they both saw it, maybe not, but in any case, after the bishop takes the knight on e7, you can kind of tell that the game is definitely over, and Oppenheimer did as well. So thanks so much for watching. Kind of cool to see a game between 2 really famous historical figures. Not the highest level played game, but certainly a solid game. Both players definitely know their way around a chessboard, yeah, pretty exciting stuff. So thanks for watching. Drop a like, drop subscribe. Let me know of any games you'd like me to review, and we'll see you next time.